Hello and welcome to Are You Acting or Reacting? Lessons in Global Supply Chain Risk from IBM. My name is Sheena Smith and I run client programs here at Spend Matters. We have a great program planned for you today featuring Pierre Mitchell, our Chief Research Officer here at Spend Matters, and Lou Ferretti, a project executive focused on product environmental compliance and supply chain social responsibility at IBM. I'll just do a very quick introduction to Spend Matters if you haven't been to one of our events before. The Spend Matters network of sites is the leading online B2B source for procurement and supply chain news. We keep everyone from Fortune 50 companies to students in the supply chain program at Michigan State, from chief procurement officers to category managers, in the know on procurement, supply chain, and beyond. A couple quick things before we dive in. If you have any technical questions, please reach out to me directly using the Q&A panel. You're also in good hands with two very seasoned presenters today, so feel free to interrupt the show with your own questions or comments relating to content. I'd like to really thank our sponsor, Resiliency, today. If you have any Resiliency specific questions, we have their CMO, Wayne Kakamo, behind the scenes ready to answer those. And as you poke around your webinar dashboard today, I'd like to point you toward the resources section where we've included some goodies for you. Resilink's Riskipedia and Ultimate Guide to Supply Chain Resiliency Program Success. And I also encourage you to check out the Global Supply Chain Resiliency Council link as well. That being said, you certainly didn't register for this webinar to hear me jabbering on, so it's time for me to pass it along to the real experts today. Pierre, can you do a quick introduction to yourself and hit us with some background before we head into Lou's presentation?
Sure, Sheena. Thanks, everybody, for attending. As you said, I'm going to try to not speak too long here before we let the guys in the trenches actually talk about some of their lessons. And it actually, IBM is a great study just in terms of managing a complex supply chain, both products and services. Just a few slides. One is I wanted to just kind of paint a little bit of a landscape around some of the recent data that's been out there across multiple research studies that have been over the last basically year or so, look at 2015 and 16, that are basically tell a very consistent story. And that is that both the frequency of supply chain risk events and the impact of them are both increasing as you get volatility that's going on out there. So if you look at some of the data, and this is from the BCI study, Business Continuity Institute, this is in their latest study, you found that basically 3/4 of folks have experienced at least one instance of supply chain disruption. So it's basically happening all the time. It's just a question of if and when and how big and where. So you need to get a handle on it. The other is, you find that folks don't really have really good full visibility of the supply chain, and that's why, bad things happen. There's a lot of reacting and firefighting and not a lot of predicting going on, which is kind of why we're doing the webcast. And fortunately what happens is you find is if you look at the next stat around where the disruptions originate from, you find that about half of them are at Tier 1, but 21% at Tier 2, 8% at Tier 3. I think the actual numbers are even higher in upstream in the tiers because sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. And most frighteningly is about, a third of companies don't even analyze the source of the disruption. So, they're not even getting to the root cause of where the major risk types are coming from. What was interesting, too, is that beyond the BCI studies, that the 2016 Deloitte CPO study, and all of these studies, 300-400 type sample sizes, that supply chain disruption was number 8 on the list of over 25 business threats, and this includes even companies that are not even, manufacturers. And in 2014, it was number 16, and now it moved up to number 8 on the list. So you've gone from, like a 33% up to like a 48% of the firms are concerned or extremely concerned. So clearly, it is an issue to be reckoned with. And if you look at the impact of those disruptions, one is you find a lot of companies are just not even, quote, hedged, if you will. And I don't mean, exotic financial hedging. I just mean whether it's inventory buffers or just, just some of the basics. A majority of them don't have any type of, insurance to even deal with if there is a major impact. But obviously, you don't want to insure this problem away. It's really around, getting to the root cause of the disruptions and being able to predict them. better. And when you look at the impact, you find that 14 and 9, about 20% are reporting cumulative losses of $1 million, and some even which $1 million from a single incident. And your results will vary, but clearly this is a game of Russian roulette. It's not if, but when. And there's been some various academic studies below in terms of the impact on return on assets, return on sales, income, and ultimately impact to shareholder value, when there is a disruption. And that issue has really manifested itself in terms of when you unpack these issues around supply chain risk, and also there's a broader compliance, but the CPO issues, the top 10 CPO issues from the latest Hackett study was you see both not just the agility imperative to kind of be able to move fast to respond to these risks, but also how do we just reduce that supply continuity risk. And that if you look at the three risk drivers around these various risks, the biggest one that's most critical right now is supply continuity. And things like regulatory compliance and supplier financial viability are lower down the list, not because they're not important, but one is that there's been some steps taken to deal with some of that, but also just because the supply continuity is really going to be something that is going to be a major hit when those supply lines are not flowing. And if you are not keeping the supply lines flowing, and you have to report bad shareholder results to Wall Street or whoever, it's going to be an issue. And this stuff is not in the abstract. I mean, we had the Taiwan earthquake earlier, not too long ago, and then just most recently, last month, we had the Kumamoto earthquake. And I'm not going to go through in extreme detail the exact sequence of what happened. You can go see go through this, find more details out out on the web from different sources. But we pulled this together to just kind of show this is kind of like a month in the life of a major event. And you see that a couple days after it happened, Toyota immediately was looking at losses of $277 million. So the more in which you go to a just-in-time environment, the more in which supply disruptions are really going to affect you, because you're not going to have the physical buffers to really help you. And frankly, physical buffers are not necessarily the best solution. They're a great way to hide some of the issues, but ultimately you want to get to some of these root causes. So I mean, if you look through the rest of these lists, you'll see that it's not just what happened upstream at some of the supply sources, but eventually you started seeing the downstream types of effects in terms of what was happening downstream in the supply chain. And you look at the GM plants that had disruptions because of lack of supply, but it just works its way through the supply chain. So the bottom line is it's real. And the challenge why it continues to be a problem is that a lot of firms really struggle to be proactive. And one of the challenges is you have to have accountability and measurement for supply risk. And because quite often procurement supply chain is held accountable for something they haven't really had a ton of influence on, and frankly, just relative to other priorities, cost savings, et cetera, it hasn't been an issue. Now, this differs from some of the real supply chain leaders who actually view risk as part and parcel of reward and of savings, because ultimately what's important to you around quality and flexibility and savings and total cost, you want to protect those things, right? So if you're going to protect them, you by definition have to be good at supply risk, and you're going to have to invest a little more than a couple of fractional FTEs per $1 billion of spend, to do it. But even though you might not have, let's say, immediately the top-down mandate, one of the things you can do is, do a supply chain diagnostic, do a supply risk diagnostic. There, whether it's with a consulting firm or directly with the tool providers. I mean, I took a look at some of the stuff that Resilink's been working on with their diagnostic tool, and it's really powerful, and it's a great way to go through that process so that you can at least put a number, a high-level kind of directional range around what's your opportunity, regardless of what path you take. The biggest piece is getting visibility into what is the opportunity, because that's always the biggest aha moment, is actually being able to see some of that. And once you do that, then you can kind of work with those stakeholders to kind of go and build a compelling business case that's either maybe a little risk and compliance oriented, or it might be actually, hey, there's some actually money that we can save by reducing complexity, getting better visibility, improving our supply chain planning processes. So there's a lot of synergies that risk has, and what you find that the supply chain risk management leaders do is, first of all, they've already probably been burned. I found is that nobody just does this without having tasted it, and just given the data you saw before, it is an issue, obviously, that's out there. But one of the biggest things they do is they do some type of it starts quite often with a project or program or a committee or team or a supply chain risk program, and basically you go in there and you model your risk types and your probabilities and your impacts, and you prioritize those mitigations. And some of them are going to be preventative, some of them are going to be more of which predictive analytics are a key enabler. Some will be more recovery oriented. So I always talk about the superhero approach to this. So, you need Superman with X-ray vision and Spidey sense for Spider-Man on the prediction piece, but you also need agility like the Flash, and you need someone that can absorb the blow on the resiliency side. So whether that's Plastic Man or, the Hulk, pick your favorite superhero, what you really want to have is a team of those capabilities working together, and that's the part of having good processes and tools that can get a big picture view at the high level around supply risk, but then also drills in a fair amount of granularity down to the part level, supplier level, location level, and risk level, and then put that monitoring in place so that your job isn't just reacting and firefighting. Your job is not going to be the SWAT team. It's going to be working air traffic control so that you can kind of know things are under control and really be notified when you see an impending, quote, collision in the supply chain, so that you can really get ahead of it sooner than your competitors. So, enough of me talking. I am going to pass this over to Lou. He's got an amazing background and has lots of stories. So I'm going to have Lou tell you his story and experience at IBM in terms of supply chain risk management. So, Lou, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Pierre. Greetings, everyone. So this is Lou Ferretti from IBM. I do have several organizations that I manage and that are interrelated. So I do have product environmental compliance for all our hardware. I also have supply chain social responsibility, and then related to that is conflict minerals as a separate group. And beyond that, we have supply chain sustainability as a program, and then business continuity, resiliency management, and along with risk. So those are the 6 programs. Some of them are closely related. Some of them are somewhat distant cousins. So today I'm going to talk to you about risk. And the question is, are you acting or reacting? And the point here is that while I have this vessel here with their cargo containers tipped over, the information that I'm going to share with you and the experiences we have, we apply to both our direct and indirect. So, I mean, our direct meaning the products that we buy from suppliers that go into the hardware that we sell, that we manufacture, as well as our indirect spend that we use for ourselves and our clients. Just to give you a perspective, our indirect spend is roughly 5 times our direct spend. So it's a matter of public record. Our direct spend in hardware is about $5 billion, and our indirect spend is $25 billion and going much, much higher. So the techniques that we use have to be applicable to both types of procurement, and we find that making some adjustments that we can accommodate that. Okay, so I'll move to this next slide here. It talks about managing risk as an imperative. I used to, some years ago, have to convince people that things were more riskier than they were realizing that. But one of our studies, our IBM Business Value Institute studies, had looked at the trends, mega trends, and obviously one of them was risk complexity. So I have that highlighted in red. And the point is that this is not just for the supply chain. It is the world we live in, and how we do business. And so we're not going to be able to avoid this. The question is, how are we going to be able to take advantage of risk and make it work for us? If we as a company or yourselves were very conservative in sourcing, we would probably miss out on the opportunity to take advantage of globalization and a global supply chain. But having a global supply chain brings a significant benefit, but you also have to be watchful to understand, do I really want to take that risk, and what is the reward? And if I do take the risk, what are the things that I need to be building in place to have resiliency and to have mitigation? The next slide was from a study that we did some years ago, I guess 2 years ago, on a chief supply chain officer study, and I have highlighted in red that things that kept chief supply chain officers up, one of them being risk management. So that probably was not the case some years before, but even more interesting than risk management going to the forefront is the fact that supply chain visibility has even become more preeminent than risk management, and they go hand in hand. So if you're going to manage risk, you need visibility of your supply chain and suppliers and multi-tiers, so that, and we'll talk about this in a minute, that you know what's going on, and as appropriate, you can take the next best action if you have information. So here is a slide of time gives options, and I'll tell you why we built this slide. We were working on this, I think Pierre had mentioned, I'll just take a sidebar here. We were doing something involving risk in prior years, but not that much, believe it or not. And we found that we were asked from the top of our business when a couple of things happened in 2009, when the gas pipeline going through the Ukraine was threatened to be shut down by Putin, and there was some skirmishes going on in the Middle East that were affecting some of our suppliers. The question was asked from the very top of the business, what are we doing about it? And quite frankly, the answer was nothing. We didn't even look at the supply chain. We looked at maybe suppliers, and as most have done, we looked at their financial credit worthiness. We looked at the continuity of supply with a single or sole sourced, and maybe some logistics. So it was a very light touch. Now, quite frankly, maybe that was sufficient. Maybe that was sufficient, in years, say, prior to 2009 or 2008, but certainly that's not the case now. We have found, and as Pierre said, you can get burnt by these things, that something like the tsunami in March 11, 2011 could be a turning point. Now, we were actually exercising our risk tool and program prior to that. But I will tell you, if you ask me, Lou, what made people pay attention to this, and what made the users, the buyers, the sourcing people be willing to use this tool, even though it was extra work, it was that event. That was a watershed turning point event that we didn't have at that time all the categories in the tool, but immediately thereafter, those that were not in the tool, they were rushing to the door to get into the tool, because the tool that we had at that time gave such visibility, instant visibility to our suppliers, commodities, and other things that we needed to know to make decisions. So my point here is, like anything, the sooner you know something, the more options you have. So if you could know something at time zero, that could be ahead of your competitor by 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, whatever it is, because likely in a time of a crisis, there's limited supply. And there's no law that says that supplier has to parse things out on an equal basis, or that you have to get anything. So often if you are there first, and you also have a good relationship with that supplier, and you've chosen not to annoy them through the course of your relations, you might get the lion's share of what's there. So again, I'm just going to emphasize that knowing what you need to know at time zero gives you many, many options. You might liken it to the quarterback, right? As he falls back, and if the line is holding, the defensive line is holding, then he can look down the field and make better choices of where he wants to throw the ball. It's the same thing here. Again, it could be a short period of time or a longer period of time, but time gives one options to determine what they can do. Now, of course, in determining what you're going to do, that means or implies that you have a playbook, that you've thought about these things ahead of time, and it's not just a reaction to the event and hoping that that action is the right reaction. So this slide here, the world of risks, I've used this several times, and I'll tell you that likely, if you're listening here, one or more, or maybe all these things have happened to you because they have all happened to us. And when I put this somewhat eclectic collage thing together, you start walking around these things. On the upper left-hand side, I have the periodic table. So, why do I have the periodic table? Well, if you look at the elements I have highlighted there, what are those? Rare earth metals. And rare earth metals go into electronics, they go into the auto industry, they go into any type of turbines and things, high efficiency materials, as well as the defense. So as you might know, that China had 97% of what was available at one time, and it looked like there was going to be a shortage. They were holding back supply, and it wasn't until the WTO entered into this, and there was a case that ruled against China, and they relented. It looked pretty grim. In fact, I was actually at a meeting with the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Assistant Secretary of Commerce, to discuss with other industry leaders what our view of rare earth metals were and what we were asking of the administration at that time. So that was something that was very serious. And the interesting thing is, if you ask your first-tier supplier, do you see a shortage of rare earth metals, chances are they don't know. They just don't have the visibility to look down the supply chain. So it would be wise if we as companies are managing global supply chain were actually to look deeper and see things that were emerging as risks and then take preventative actions. Just on the next one, you might see that explosion. That was the Hynix fire in China. So the memory industry has been fairly well consolidated, so there's only a couple of memory suppliers. So when that happened, the question is, are you single source, dual source? Do you have inventory? What's your next best action? And the cloud of smoke is pretty dark there. So understanding, was there more smoke than damage, or equal amount of damage to the smoke, and being able to get to the company there and understand exactly what was happening rather than just rely on news reports would be essential. I'm going to move to the right-hand side there. You might recognize that is the Democratic Republic of Congo and its tin, tungsten, tantalum, gold. So the auto industry, the apparel industry, the electronic industry, we all have to comply with the Dodd-Frank bill and demonstrate our chain of custody, our due diligence of where we're getting this material. And you might know the egregious human rights issues that are going on there in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the 9 covered countries. So if any of you are dealing with this, you know that it's a tremendous amount of effort to do this piece of work, and its progress is made probably in inches as we move forward here. But that's not going to be something that shuts down the supply chain in the next hour. But given the visibility on being that the Dodd-Frank bill is a name and shame law, that what you have to do is meet the law. You don't have to be conflict-free, but the press and the media will take care of anyone who chooses not to work in that direction. So a very, very serious issue. On the right-hand side, that's Thailand. Many of us have many suppliers in Thailand, and they're either having martial law or they're having a coup, and we have to be prepared of what do we do when that happens, and we also need to assess the news reports of how serious is it on the ground. I'm just going to go to the far left there. Cybersecurity probably is the emerging number one risk to companies in general, but particularly suppliers. So the question is, what are we doing to protect the data that we've given them, and then what are they doing to protect their business? So we have to be interested in that level of continuity and resiliency. Climatic factors, that is an aerial overview of Hurricane Yolanda. So many of us have lots of suppliers in the Philippines, and the Philippines gets devastated. The question is, if we have suppliers there, what level of impact can they take? Hurricane landing a typhoon at level 5, or can they handle level 2? Having the intelligence and having the experience will allow us either to take an action or watch and not take an action. Above that is the Ukraine. We have lots of indirect suppliers in Ukraine, so the question is, what is going to happen to our ability to get services from them, or even many of these are serving our internal or our external clients there. So having a good view of the political going on and what's happening on the ground is essential if we're going to make right decisions. Sometimes the decision is don't do anything, but you need to have information to do that. Of course, financials, since September 2008, when the Great Recession occurred, many suppliers have found their cash flow impacted, like second and third tier suppliers. That picture happens to be of Apple's supplier who was doing the glass there, that they were surprised that they had gone bankrupt. There are many stories about that, but certainly it was an unpleasant surprise. Environmental, I think, Pierre, you mentioned that, and I have that group reporting to me. There are hundreds and hundreds of laws coming on the books every year in virtually every state, every country, and many of them are well-intended. They're written in a way maybe that's difficult to understand and even harder to comply with, and sometimes with very short notice, it can really be disruptive to the supply chain and our ability to produce product and put it on the market, and or we certainly want to avoid, we want it to be compliant, avoid fines, penalties, and so forth. Regulatory compliance is becoming more prominent, right, with the Foreign Corruption Act. We see that there's a lot of pressure on industries, and people take, aberration in their behavior here and do things to achieve results that later on I'm sure they wish they hadn't. And the last thing on the right-hand side is reputation. That happens to be a representation of the U.S. government's using a company to look at the 25 or so contract manufacturers in Malaysia because there were reports of child labor, forced labor, and other egregious working conditions there. So we need to be looking at that. No company wants to be doing business with their suppliers and have their suppliers called out in the press for poor behavior. It's tremendously detrimental to reputation and eventually could even impact the ability for that supplier to stay with us and supply what they do. Now, I've just given you an overview of this. There are many, many more in the summary of risk here, but these are some of the things that we're looking at, not limited to these things, and we have various tools and information sources that give us, like our control tower, a view of this so that we can take an immediate action if we choose to. Now I'm just going to move on to this slide here with the circle on the supply chain. Many of you probably have seen the advertisements in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere where you see IBM advertising Watson, cognitive computing. So we've actually used our Watson, the power of Watson here, where we built a tool that looks at, and we started out with climatic events. We'll look at a typhoon going into the Philippines or Southeast Asia, and we'll be able to track that real time and watch that move across the seas. We'll be able to understand its direction, change of direction, its speed, its estimated landfall and timing and so forth. And we also have, I'm going to show you the next slide. It's a little bit busy, but we packed in a lot of information. So IBM has purchased the weather company, so we're getting real-time feeds from the weather company. We're also picking up social sentiment. That's what that circle is there on the right-hand side, the oval. We want to pick up what's going on the ground. Are people leaving the island? Are they shuttering businesses? What is happening immediately? So we tap into those sources. And this helps us, it feeds into our internal control tower of what actions do we want to take. So this is a tool that we piloted last year on climatic events, and specifically climatic events in Southeast Asia and Japan. We're now building it out for the rest of the world and climatic events, and then extending this to political, social, civil unrest, as well as seismic events. So this will be something we use. It's something we use internally, and we'll be able to commercialize this also. Now, I'm going to pause here. My next slide here. We are using, over this last not quite a year, Relink. We have had our own internal set of tools that we built on our various platforms, and I have happened to have known Relink for some time, and I've looked at what they do, and I found that they do what we do, but they do it better. And things that we wanted to do that we just couldn't afford to do or have the resources, they're also doing. So there was a situation here that we had examined this, and we actually are moving much of our risk business to Relink here. So when it says here, are you acting or reacting, what's your response? Those happen to be some of the tools that the Relink supply chain solution provides us, and that we're actively using today. So if you go to the last slide here, the way that we believe that this has to be handled is the use of information. We could always, on the production side, have extra inventory, but I don't think any of us can afford to have inventory as the primary or sole answer of how we're going to mitigate a supply disruption. And certainly inventory doesn't work on the indirect side. So to make these intelligent decisions that are effective, and I say effective meaning that they get the job done, they maintain supply continuity, whether it is of goods and or services, without being overly costly and burdensome to the organization, the information, real-time information alerts, and the analytics associated with that is essential to help the control tower risk organization and the executives of the supply chain, and even the larger experience, the business, make the right decisions. That way we can have product that we can put into our end product, that we can fulfill our requirements with our customers. Our customers can view us as reliable suppliers. The insurance industry can recognize that we have these controls and structure in place and even get some type of favorable pricing from them, as well as being able to demonstrate this to our clients to, in the end, see that we can be trusted to deliver on what we say. And it pays dividends both in real time as far as saving money, avoidance of spending undue money, and a way to conserve resource and really to economize and have an experienced team running this on a relatively small basis of resources and staffing. So what I'm going to do here is stop. Apparently you've been a very good audience in listening intently. I'm going to turn this back to Shana, and if there are questions, looks like there are questions, Shana.
There's plenty of questions. It's a big audience, and there's a lot to talk about on supply risk. So I'd like to thank everyone, especially our speakers, for being here today. I'd like to start with a question for you, Lou, on how did you get the executive buy-in to use a solution like Relink? I know change is often pretty hard in really large organizations.
You know what? I'm going to answer that question, but I'm even going to back up. When our senior vice president asked our CPO, what are we doing about the Putin thing in 2009, and the answer was nothing, our CPO said that, Lou would do, I've worked on Y2K and I've worked on pandemic, we would do something similar to that. And I never envisioned having a tool or more extended process, but as I looked at the complexity of this, I knew that we had to build a tool. And we did it internally initially. If quite frankly, if Relink was in existence then, I probably would have used them. But we built the tool internally, but you might ask, how did I get the money? It never made the clip level. Our ROI, we had all kinds of ways of showing that there was being an advantage. It just never made the clip level. And then our CPO, who was very, very strong in this, just jumped us to the top of the list of IT projects and said, this is not traditional ROI. This is an insurance. We need this. And that brought me right up to the top of the IT funding, and I got funding at that time. Now, so we'd been working this for quite some time, and then I had looked at Relink several times, and we actually did like a comparison, an equivalency of what we do and what they do, and did they do what we do and more, and could it be a more efficient way of doing the business? And that's we showed that. We actually had we had a new CPO at that time. We showed it to a host of supply chain vice presidents, and I will tell you, after 2 hours, we got a head nod that this is the way we want to go.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to ask a question to both of you. I'm going to ask Pierre to start here. So Steve from the audience says, speed to recovery after a disruption is important. So how are companies moving to before zero on the timeline and getting better at predicting disruptions?
Well, I'll start it, but then Lou, bless for your experience. I found that a lot of this is kind of risk dependent. So if it's going to be around looking at weather disruption and being able to do some predictive analytics, there's a reason why IBM bought the weather company, is to be able to have those available and integrate into IBM supply chain and also for its customers. as well. So depending on the risk type, it's going to lead you quite often to different sets of source data and analytics that can plug into your core supply chain risk management, platform. Other types of data where it's not just going to be some predictive algorithm, but you actually need to be on the floor with your suppliers. That's where you want to set up some smart measurements in terms of supplier capabilities, delivery performance, things like that, and have some trend analysis that, and build kind of a 360 view around those suppliers and suppliers to kind of give you some insight. So I do find it tends to be fairly granular in terms of what that predictive analytic looks like for that risk type, but you ultimately do want to hang it off of a common platform, which is probably where Lou is finding some of the benefits there of having a common platform. But Lou, what are some of your experiences there?
I'll give you this in 2 bites. So, we have quite a few suppliers in the Philippines, and in the early days, whenever there was a typhoon, I would alert the team, and we would start working on this right away. And where is it going to hit, and how, who are suppliers, and so forth. But what we found over time, as we accumulate information, is that if there was a storm that was, level 5 or what do they call it, category 5, and it was 160 kilometers out, and it was predicted to hit landfall at level 2, category 2, we knew from experience that the suppliers of that area could, no pun intended, weather the type of storm. So, we started to become more thoughtful and insightful of when do we, really start becoming active, and we know enough that the chances are that storm will pass over and not cause disruption. So the accumulation of our data has helped us to know when something would really come to fruition that would be serious enough to take an action, and when we could just stand by and watch it. So that's one thing. The other thing is the storm you might have seen across Mexico a couple of months ago. You remember they were saying that it was going to be like the mother of all storms. It was 200-mile-an-hour winds and so forth. I mean, we were tracking that for days beforehand, and we were looking at the path as we were going to go through this, and it was going to go right through our Guadalajara plant, and we have quite a few suppliers there. So we were watching as we were tracking this storm, do we need to close Guadalajara? Do we need to fulfill the products that they sell out of another manufacturing site around the world? So we started, preparing that days in advance, and then that actually hit over the weekend. And if you people remember that, it turned out to be not very much, which fortunately. So knowing, I'll just give you one more example. In Taiwan, it's a small country, but if you see, sometimes they have these landslides, with the almost buildings falling into the river in the south. Well, that's terrible loss of life and property, but most of the suppliers are in the north, the industrial sector. So knowing where your suppliers are, knowing the geography of the country will help you anticipate whether you need to take an action or not.
Excellent. Thanks, Lou. And with that, I'm going to answer our most popular question today, which is, will I receive a copy of the slides? And I'm happy to say that yes, I'll send out an email within the next 24 hours with a copy of the slides, as well as the on-demand presentation today, so you can forward it out to all of your friends, colleagues, parents, whoever you think would be interested. With that being said, I'm going to wrap up. There were a ton of other questions. Please take a look back on Spend Matters over the next couple of weeks. We'll be sure to address them there on our site. And if you asked a Resiliency specific question, I'll have an expert from their team follow up with you directly. So thank you, everybody, for joining today, and let's get back to our days managing supply risk. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.